talk on what is going to happen to EGFR TKI in the next 5 years. So with that, I would like to just show you my disclosure, and more specifically, I'm on the board of directors of these three companies: AstraZeneca, Hutchinson Chimed, and Xenomics. Now, so start off with some bad news, unfortunately. If we look at the world statistic, we're not going to have a good time. In a sense, is that we're going to expect more than 20 million patients new cases every year. So that is going to make a huge impact on our resources, work, and also likely a number of life. But in view of that, I want to also share with you some good news. Is actually, this was reported from New England Journal of Medicine on the mortality of lung cancer in the United States according to SER. Now, this is SER is probably one of the most accurately captured epidemiology of cancer and cancer death. And for that, you can see that between year 2006 and 2013, there's a reduction of lung cancer mortality by about 3.2% per year. And while comparing to 2013 to 16, there's actually even an annual reduction about 6%. Now, this is exciting in a way is that there's no doubt it was the molecular targeted therapy that had made an impact on the lung cancer on the whole. Now, because the immunotherapy has not really arrived in this period as yet. So the question is now, with this encouraging news, how are we going to optimize the situation in the next 5 years? So for that, I bring in three concepts. First is that what will be the optimal sequence that we can consider in terms of treatment for the advanced stage disease? Can we optimize on the concept of minimal residual disease, which is a concept getting popular for the patient with resectable lung cancer or other malignancy? The third concept is that how are we going to deal with the resistant situation? So hopefully by conquering these three areas, by 2015, we may further reduce the mortality of lung cancer overall. Let me just focus on the sequence. Now, this is old slide now. I mean, with support from all my Asian colleagues, we managed to do this study to demonstrate the concept of personalized medicine. So you are familiar with that. I'm not going to repeat that, but we move on to the second generation when we have the second generation drug that are associated with higher potency. Well, we thought that with a high potency, we may get better response rate and more durable response. And this so-called the high potency is actually related to the covalent bonding in the ATP pocket. And so once this is binded, then it's become irreversible. So that's one concept. The other concept is the pan-HER inhibition. In the family of the HER, which is EGFR, HER2, 3, and 4, they do dimerize. But then if we are able to inhibit all the HER family, then we may reduce the dimerization, therefore have a stronger inhibition of the EGFR signal. Our first work was done on dacomitinib together with Pasiani, my good friend, and then we looked into 45 patients with the EGFR mutation and using dacomitinib, a second generation drug, that with a response rate about 76.8%. And then that is associated with a median progression-free of 18 months and overall survival of 40 months. It's not encouraging, but again, small number, and also may possibly be a selective patient. So we need the randomized data to tell us how is a second generation drug compared with first generation drug in terms of efficacy outcome. So LUX-Lung-7 is the first one that have given us the data, afatinib versus gefitinib. But then you know that this is a randomized phase 2b study with no specific endpoint, but then they got 3, progression-free, time to treatment failure, and overall survival. They do reported a median of 11 versus 10.9, hazard ratio 0.73. The major difference is actually towards the end, at about 2 years, that you may see that there's a progression-free rate of 18% versus 8%. So some improvement. However, the more important study is the Archer 1050 that Yilong Wu and I reported. We exclude the patient with brain met. Primarily, we did not know the efficacy of this drug on patients with brain met at the time when we first did the randomized study. 45 milligram dacomitinib versus gefitinib using progression-free survival as the endpoint. And we did have a positive study, a single endpoint of a progression-free. We are actually looking back to the comparison with the Lung 7. The median progression-free rate was about 30.6% compared to 9.6%, which is 20% different. And the median progression-free was about 14.7 months versus about 9.2 months. Hazard ratio 0.59, significant p-value. So this is the first time second generation is proven on the phase 3 study to be better than a first generation drug in terms of progression-free survival. And then it was translated in the overall survival benefit about 34 months versus about 27 months. And then the p-value is also significant at 0.76. Again, this is the first one that had demonstrated over survival benefit. Now, but that comes in a price. Lung 7, we got more toxicity in terms of the diarrhea, mucositis, dermatitis, and paronychia. With the grade 3 toxicity that we have to dose reduced for Lung 7. Similarly, after 1050, we got significant proportion of patients with the grade 3 diarrhea, paronychia, dermatitis, dermatitis, and we also need to have dose reduction. And those patients, which is we thought the best way to manage it, is actually about 66%. Now, 2/3 of the patient regard dose reduction, then you have a serious question is that whether dose reduction may be associated with the worst outcome. So that's why we do an exploratory analysis. And then, first of all, by reducing the dose, then throughout the 30 milligram, 50 milligram, we were able to manage to reduce the incidence of grade 3 toxicity of diarrhea, dermatitis, and stomatitis, which is good. But then we were able to perceive the progression-free survival. The green line is the one with the dose reduction, and you can see that it's actually similar in terms of progression-free outcome with the overall population. So in a sense, is that the dose reduction may not have any adverse impact on the outcome of the progression-free. Now, third generation drug is a well-known one, and then the target is actually T790M. And then we were able to demonstrate successfully that by selecting the patient T790M mutation after failing first generation drug, we were able to have an improved progression-free survival 10 months was 4.4, and it become a world standard to look for T790M mutation. And that was back in 2017 when we published the data. Now, that leads to the more important questions that now we got 3 generation, how best to sequence them? Now, this is what I have in my mind when I see the patient. There's a first generation TKI, and then after that, if the patient did not have a major progression, we may allow them the treatment beyond progression. And then if that was okay, and finally failed, then we may have a subsequent therapy 1, 2, or even 3, and eventually supportive care. Now, the first part is the progression-free survival that we measure by RECIST criteria. But sometimes we use the progression-free survival 2, which is towards the end of the subsequent therapy 1. And then the most accurate is the overall survival that we look for from the time of diagnosis until the time of death. That is our perception and definition of the value of outcome. Now, when you compare the so-called outcome of overall survival, we understand that the first part is within controlled situation in a randomized study. But after that, although we still monitor the patient for the outcome, but it's uncontrolled because in a way is that we have no dictation of what kind of treatment the patient may get. So when we compare one arm with the other in a randomized study, like for example, first line osimertinib compare our first or second gen TKI, although there may be a difference in progression-free survival, but it's not necessarily translated in overall survival benefit, is because the subsequent treatment can be diversely different. So we cannot really control and dictate the outcome of this. So in a way, when we interpret the data of the improvement progression-free survival, but we're still looking for the overall survival outcome, we have to look into the impact of the subsequent treatment. So let's look at one potential sequence, a first or second generation drug, randomized, received it, subsequent treatment. You will say that about 40 to 50% may get osimertinib, and then they get the 10-month progression survival as was demonstrated in the OVAL-3. But then the patient who did not get the T790M mutation, they may receive the chemotherapy, and then they will have the median progression-free survival about 5 months. So in a sense, is that how would that translate into overall survival? In honesty, we actually don't have that much data to tell us the overall survival of the sequence incorporating the osimertinib into it. We only get selective data like this one, a retrospective study from Taiwan by James Yang's group, that they look into the retrospective analysis of patients who failed TKI and then received osimertinib. And those were the patients who actually get a without brain met about 28 months, with the brain met about only 10 months. Overall, it's about 16.7 months. But this is a retrospective data. Now, prospectively, the only set of data that actually we can count on is OR3. Now, but this is only on the patient with the T7M positive patient that we have actually median overall survival about 26.8 months compared to 22.5 months, has a ratio of 0.87. Now, you may say that, hey, there's no overall survival benefit. But again, you know well this due to the crossover. And just look at the crossover rate, which is actually 99 patients, 71%. So in other words, you're T7M positive as long as you receive your osimertinib either in the first subsequent therapy or the second subsequent therapy, you may be fine in terms of having some degree of improvement survival. But if you look into the number, you are still looking in anywhere between 22 months and 27 months, which is not bad, consider the patient already received close to or more than 1 year of first generation TKI. Now, of course, there is a forward study that looked into osimertinib as a first-line therapy. It's hugely successful. The median overall progression-free survival, 18.9 months versus 10.2 months, probably is because of its ability to prevent the T7M mutation resistance. But when they translate it in overall survival, the numbers are actually quite impressive. Medians for 38.6 months versus 32 months, has a ratio of 0.78. But then we have to look into this a little bit more logically. Now, with this number, the question is that, can we achieve that with the sequential therapy? Now, if you look into the control arm, which that received the first generation TKI, and so they actually had approximately 65% of patients that had second-line therapy, and of which 47% received osimertinib. So in total, 30% received second-line osimertinib. Now, if you look at the hazard ratio of 0.78 or 79, osimertinib 30 median of 38 months versus 31.8 months in the first generation TKI, and the crossover at 30%. But you must ask the question, what if there's a higher crossover rate? Will this hazard ratio be still significant? So in other words, can we really conclude that we cannot have an overall survival benefit with sequential therapy? So those are the data that you have to keep in mind. I don't think I have an absolute answer of yes or no, what is the best way, but these are the very useful data that can help you to make a decision for your patient. Now, of course, you can ask the next question about what if we start a second generation drug and then osimertinib. We are only limited data. I mean, for that, the afatinib, we have the Luxang 7, very impressive, the hazard ratio, but there's a very small number of patients, only about 30 patients. Similarly, for Archer 1050, we only had 22 patients, the median progression-free is over 6.7 months. So I think that helped us to understand and how optimize the sequence, but more importantly, let's look at how else we can improve the outcome by looking at the concept of minimal residual disease. Now, the concept of minimal residual disease was first promoted or come into life by Charles Swanson's group by article in Nature 2017 on a project called Tracer X based in UK. So it's not a big number of patients, but they had the resected lung cancer patient, and they do deep genomic study, was able to develop their mutation tree, and then use a serial plasma to follow them. So basically, they were able to identify the trunk of the mutation, are the one that you're likely going to receive, you're going to get in the plasma. So the bespoke, the mutation will be detectable in the plasma per se. Now, that concept was further looked into by another study in the cancer discovery, and about the same time, they looked into the minimal residual disease on using a 28 gene panel on the patient that is resected lung cancer. And interestingly, The 20 patient that they ever detected the plasma DNA that is positive related to cancer, almost all of them had recurrence. 18 of them had radiographic progression, and 2 of them had clinical progression. So we may be able to detect who are the patients that have progression, after the resection of the lung cancer. But can apply the same concept for patient stage 4 disease. I mean, especially for EGFR, which is a trunk mutation, and we already get technology, we can detect it. Let's look at some of the data. That is actually the concept of monitoring. Once we put a patient on TKI, can we actually monitor and make decision clinically for that? Let's look at the data. Now, first of all, it's what to monitor. Well, we can either monitor the activating mutation, exon 19, 21, or you can monitor the occurrence of T790M mutation, especially if you put a patient on the first or second gen drug. Or you can actually even look at some of the subclonal mutation. Now, this is a study from FAST-2 that we have the serial plasma at the beginning, at the 3 months after the TKI, and then at the progression. We were able to demonstrate that the plasma level go down with the 3 months and then increased, at the time progression. But more specifically, patient with persistent mutation at 3 months, then the chance of progression is earlier. That is a median of 7.2 months compared to a patient without is 12 months. Over survival, same thing. If you got persistent mutation at 3 months, your median over survival is going to be 18.2 months compared to 32 months if you don't have a persistent mutation. So that was the first study that we have published in 2015. Subsequently, if you look into aura-free data, we also show the same phenomenon, that the patient with detectable mutation, then actually the response rate is lower. And also the median progression-free survival is also lower. So in other words, the plasma persistence at 6 weeks is predictive of the outcome of osimertinib. And pushing it earlier, they look at 3 weeks, that's also give you the same phenomenon. So I think in a way they give us some idea that detection of EGFR mutation can bring us into some idea what is going to happen to the patient. Right now, there is an Apple study ongoing by your RTC, which is randomized to either osimertinib or gefitinib on plasma monitoring. Hello. And then it's also can then go to the other one is the gefitinib followed by the RECIST progression. So that is on the primary endpoint progression-free survival. The least, let's take a look at the resistance. Okay. Now the resistance is actually well known at this point. And you can see the fact that the patient, whether on gefitinib or on first line osimertinib or second osimertinib, you can persistently see HER2 amplification, MET amplification, and then in the post-osimertinib, you also see a certain percentage of C797 mutation. Now, to remind you, the C797 is the binding site for the osimertinib, and therefore mutation there will prevent binding of the osimertinib. So the pattern is actually start to get a little bit clear. The question is that how do we tackle them? Now this year, we have get a little bit more idea by understanding of the cancer evolution. In a way is that we know the resistance is likely going to be a subclonal event. So in other words, you can catch them early, but also if you catch them late, you're going to have a very heterogeneous cancer, meaning that certain tumor site may be dominant by one gene, and certain tumor site may be dominant by other genes. MAC is actually one important feature that also come out. This is from JCO 2019 from Singapore, that approximately 26% of the patient with mutation has certain degree of MAC amplification in the beginning. So in other words, that is why we do have see MAC as a resistance mechanism, overall. And also, this MAC amplification can also be heterogeneous, meaning that part of the tumor is actually MAC amplification of the tumor may not be. So making it a little bit difficult to target those amplification. So we need some new toy. I mean, when you have new problem, you need new toy. And this year in ESMO, we do have some new toy. And amivantamab, you probably already heard about it. It is a bispecific antibody, MEK and EGFR together. And then their early data is actually quite suggestive of some efficacy as a single agent. But this year, there is a Chrysalis study which actually combined the amivantamab together with lazertinib. Lazertinib is actually a third generation EGFR TKI from Korea. So Dr. Cho from Korea have reported on this combination and the patient with osimertinib resistance. So you got resistant osimertinib, and then you put on this combination, you got a 36% response rate. Not bad. 1 out of 3 patients may get response. And then the median for it is still short, but you can see a lot of patients had a persistent control, but now it's still too early for the progression-free survival. So I think this is one potential area that we can look into, as a one treatment paradigm for the resistance to osimertinib. Now they're going to do a phase 3 study called the Mariposa, which means that they're in the treatment naive patient randomized to the combination osimertinib or lazertinib alone. Personally, I don't think it's a bright idea, because I think that although you got good combination, can serve that as a second line treatment, but they really want to move it to first line. I think mostly for commercial reason, but I'm not optimistic about that. The other interesting one is called the U31402, which is a ADC, antibody drug conjugate, which is a monoclonal antibody targeting HER3. And then with the linker, they link a very toxic topoisomerase 1 inhibitor. And then this topoisomerase inhibitor, when it becomes intracellular, then it can kill off the cell quite quickly. Now, to cut the story short, this patritumab, that's a toucan, or U1402, then the response rate is 23%. Now, the patient population is a bit heterogeneous, so we don't have a really pattern to see what they're good at this moment. But at the 25% response rate, I think that gives us some idea that this potential had this role after failing the TKI. MAC, we got 2 MAC now that is going to come on market. Were supposed to target the MAC exon 14 skipping. Then both paper come out simultaneously, and then comatinib had already been approved for MAC exon 14 skipping in the United States. And when there is a study for combined gefitinib with comatinib in TKI failure, focusing patients with high gene copy number, then they are actually the patients who respond. The response is actually 46%, which is actually quite impressive. Now, C797S, there are a number of efforts trying to target it. The first one that was reported is had to be combined with cetuximab, but only done in preclinical, no further clinical involvement. The second one was actually also reported in cancer discovery. It's called JBJ12502, and it is actually targeting only exon 21, L858R, T790M positive, and also C797S. So you really have to be so-called a triple positive before this drug may work. And then this one can work as a single agent quite effectively. However, it's a low bioavailability. They have to do it by infusion, so they're working on the clinical development at this point. The third one is actually doesn't have much data. It's called the Blue 945, which is specifically targeted C797S. And at this moment, I don't have too much data to share. But you can see you will have about at least 2 to 3 targets that you can apply clinically for patients with C797S, hopefully by 2025. Now, ADC is another big group. I talked to you about the HER2, but there's HER3, but there's also the HER2 inhibitor, like this one is called HER2. Now, remember, there is a HER2 mutated lung cancer, and this year ASCO, they reported a response rate of 62% and median progression-free survival of 14 months, which is very impressive. This is probably the best outcome for HER2 in exon 20 insertion patient. And then another ADC is called a TROP2. TROP2 is a signal transducer. It is not active in normal cell in adult, but in oogenesis. But then in cancer, it revived it as a major signaling item for survival and cell renewal. And so this is a glycoprotein potentially can be targeted. Recently, there's a drug called Immune 132 that targeted the TROP2 in the triple negative breast cancer, and then it was actually get approved based on the relatively early data of response rate and the median progression-free survival of 5.6 months. So just the beginning, and then there's a more potent TROP2 ADC called the DS1062. Is actually the payload is even higher, which means that the drug antibody ratio is one molecule for 4 cytotoxic drug, so-called DAR of 4. And this one actually is very impressively, and Daiichi Sankyo was the producer of it, and they actually just invest $6 billion in purchase of this drug outside Japan. So I think this is encouraging and quite likely that this will come to your clinical application by 2025. Now, immunotherapy, of course, we got some early data. I just want to focus on the EGFR positive patient in IMpower 150. And then I reported this with a response rate of 70%, and then the median progression-free survival of 6.9 months. Now, this is good, but not the best. In a way, is the sample size still very small. I think we need to have more data, although a lot of people start to use it clinically. We need 2 other study data. One is CheckMate 722, which is chemo-nivo versus nivo-ipi versus chemo. And the study was of complete accrual. We shall be waiting for the result outcome any day now. And now for the chemo 789, and for the same thing, it is actually chemo IO in combination. Chemo IO versus chemotherapy. This is still being enrolled. We may anticipate result by 2022 or 23. In summary, I think right now to get the EGFR TKI, into a situation where you can optimize the survival, we have to look into the optimal sequence. You have to look into the geographically or individual patient, and there's no absolute definition of such. And optimize the concept of MRD. I think we probably may start work on the cfDNA for monitoring of resistance early on. And then there are many different mechanisms that we can fight the resistance of the C797, MEK amplification, and HER2 amplification. And all those new toy, aviventinib, DSU1402, Blues 945, DS1602, likely may arrive to your law step by 2025. So definitely, I thank you for your time. Last but not the least, what's happened to me in 2025, hopefully this will be, thank you so much for your attention.